She thought she was just testing pool water. But when 70-year-old Margaret Whitmore collapsed on my deck, clutching her chest and gasping for air, I had no idea she'd been secretly documenting every move for weeks. What started as neighborhood paranoia was about to explode into a legal nightmare that would destroy everything. The motion sensor light blazed to life at 11:47 p.m., casting harsh shadows across Jake Morrison's backyard. He rolled over in bed, squinting through the bedroom window at the pool area below. A raccoon or stray cat. But something felt different tonight. A figure moved near the pool equipment, hunched over the chemical testing station he'd installed last month. He grabbed his phone and crept to the window, careful not to disturb his sleeping wife. Sarah. The figure was an elderly woman in a pale nightgown holding what looked like a testing kit. She moved with surprising stealth for her age. The self-appointed neighborhood watch commander, who lived 3 houses down. For months, she'd been filing complaints with the Homeowners Association about everything from his grass height to his garbage can placement. But this was trespassing. He pulled on sweatpants and a t-shirt, his movements sharp with anger. Sarah stirred beside him. "Jake, what's wrong? That crazy woman is in our backyard, testing our pool water." But as Jake reached for his phone, Margaret straightened up suddenly, pressing her hand to her chest. Even from the second-story window, he could see her face contort in apparent pain. "Oh, for crying out loud," Jake muttered, torn between fury and concern. "She's probably faking it." Margaret stumbled backward, dropping her testing kit. The strips scattered across the deck as she groped for the patio furniture, her breathing visibly labored. Sarah appeared beside him at the window. "Jake, she looks like she's having a heart attack." "She's fine. She's just—" But Margaret crumpled to her knees, one hand clutching the pool ladder, the other pressed against her chest. Her mouth opened in what looked like a silent scream. The woman had made their lives miserable since they'd moved to Millbrook Estates 2 years ago, and even tried to get them fined for parking their car incorrectly in their own driveway. They rushed downstairs and out the back door. Margaret was sprawled on the deck now, her nightgown soaked with pool water, gasping like a fish out of water. "Mrs. Whitmore." Margaret's eyes rolled back, showing mostly white. Her lips were moving, but no sound came out. Her skin had a grayish pallor that made Jake's stomach turn despite his suspicions. An elderly woman, approximately 70 years old, appears to be having some kind of medical episode. She's conscious but in severe distress. Margaret's purse sat open beside the pool equipment, and inside he could see the corner of what looked like official documents. Before he could investigate further, Sarah grabbed his arm. "Jake, look at this." She held up one of the testing strips. Margaret had dropped the chemical readings. "Were completely normal, perfect. Actually, better than most public pools," Sarah whispered. "And why at midnight?" Margaret's breathing became more ragged. She tried to speak, her voice barely a whisper. The ... the chemicals ... burning ... Jake felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. What chemicals? Our pool is perfectly balanced. But Margaret had gone limp, her eyes closed, only the shallow rise and fall of her chest indicating she was still alive. Worked on Margaret, loading her onto a stretcher, Jake caught sight of more neighbors gathering on the street. A police officer approached, notebook in hand. When I looked outside, Mrs. Whitmore was in our backyard, apparently testing our pool water. Then she seemed to have some kind of medical episode. Had she been invited to test your pool? Absolutely not. She was trespassing. The officer made notes. Jake glanced at Sarah, who shrugged helplessly. "She's been difficult since we moved here. Lots of complaints about everything we do. But this is the first time she's actually come onto our property uninvited." As the ambulance pulled away, siren wailing, "We'll need you both to come to the station tomorrow to give formal statements," the officer said. After the police left, Jake and Sarah stood in their backyard, staring at the wet spots on the deck where Margaret had fallen. "This doesn't make sense," Sarah said. "Why would she sneak over here in the middle of the night to test our pool water? And why did she get sick?" Jake bent down and picked up one of the remaining test strips, all within ideal ranges. He'd been meticulous about pool maintenance since they'd installed it. His phone buzzed with a text from his neighbor across the street. "Heard the sirens. Everything okay?" And another, "My Ring camera caught everything. Call me." Jake's stomach dropped, ring cameras, security footage, but there might also be evidence that could be twisted against him and Sarah. "We need to call a lawyer," he said quietly. "An elderly woman collapsed in our backyard after being exposed to our pool chemicals. How do you think that's going to look?" "Hello, Mr. Morrison. This is Detective Maria Santos with the County Sheriff's Office. I need to speak with you about the incident involving Margaret Whitmore. Can you come to the station first thing in the morning?" Jake's blood turned to ice. "Detective, we're opening an investigation." The line went dead. Jake stared at his phone, then at Sarah, who had gone white. "What did she say?" Sarah whispered. "Margaret's claiming we poisoned her." Sarah sank into a patio chair, her hands shaking. "That's insane. She was trespassing. She's the one who brought the testing kit." But Jake was remembering the documents in Margaret's purse. Margaret Whitmore had turned her own trespassing into a potential criminal case against them. As Jake looked at his pristine pool, the water still glowing blue under the lights, he realized that everything they'd worked for, their home, their reputation, their future, might be about to disappear. The Millbrook County Sheriff's Office smelled like burnt coffee and disinfectant. Jake Morrison sat across from Detective Maria Santos, his palms sweating despite the frigid air conditioning. Sarah squeezed his hand under the metal table, her wedding ring clicking against his. Detective Santos was younger than Jake had expected, maybe mid-30s, with sharp eyes that seemed to catalog every nervous twitch. She spread photographs across the table like playing cards. "These are from the hospital," she said. "Margaret Whitmore, age 72, admitted at 12:23 a.m. with respiratory distress, chemical burns on her hands and arms, and acute poisoning. Symptoms." Jake stared at the photos. Margaret looked terrible skin mottled, breathing apparatus covering half her face, angry red welts covering her forearms, nothing like the woman who'd been prowling around his pool just hours earlier. "I don't understand," Sarah said. "She was testing our pool water. How did she get chemical burns?" "That's what we're trying to figure out." Santos pulled out a digital recorder. "Mrs. Whitmore claims she was concerned about unusual chemical odors coming from your property. She says she went to investigate and was overcome by toxic fumes." Jake felt his blood pressure spike. "That's bullshit. She was trespassing. She had a testing kit. She was sneaking around like what, Mr. Morrison? Like she was looking for something to use against us." Santos leaned back. "Use against you? How?" Jake and Sarah exchanged glances. How could they explain 2 years of harassment without sounding paranoid? "Mrs. Whitmore has filed 17 complaints against us with the Homeowners Association," Sarah said carefully. "Noise violations, parking infractions, lawn maintenance issues. None of them were valid. 17 complaints." Santos made a note. "That does seem excessive. What do you think motivated her behavior?" "She hates us," Jake said bluntly. "From day one, I think she resented new people moving into her perfect little neighborhood." Santos pulled out another folder. "I've been reviewing those HOA complaints. Some of them are ... interesting. She accused you of running an illegal business from your home, claims you were storing hazardous chemicals." Jake's stomach dropped. "What hazardous chemicals?" "Pool chemicals, Mr. Morrison. According to Mrs. Whitmore's complaints, you've been stockpiling excessive amounts of chlorine, muriatic acid, and other pool maintenance chemicals. She claims the storage violates neighborhood safety codes." "I keep pool chemicals in my garage," Jake said slowly. "Standard stuff. Chlorine tablets, shock treatment, pH balancer. Everything's store-bought and properly labeled. How much would you say you have?" Jake thought about his garage. He'd bought in bulk at the beginning of the season to save money. Containers of chlorine, a few gallons of muriatic acid, some algazide, normal supplies for a backyard pool, maybe 50 pounds of chlorine tablets, 5 gallons of acid, some other stuff, nothing excessive. Santos made another note. "Mrs. Whitmore's medical report shows exposure to extremely high levels of chlorine gas. The kind of exposure that could happen if someone improperly mixed chemicals." "I didn't mix anything," Jake said, his voice rising. "I wasn't even near the pool when she got sick. But you were near your chemical storage, weren't you? In the garage." Jake felt the trap closing around him. "I went to the garage to get my phone charger earlier that evening, around 10 o'clock, and Mrs. Whitmore got sick around midnight. That's a 2-hour window where chemical vapors could have been building up." Sarah leaned forward. "Detective, You're talking about this like Jake deliberately created some kind of chemical weapon. He maintains our pool the same way thousands of people maintain their pools. Most people don't have neighbors who end up in the hospital with chemical poisoning, Mrs. Morrison. The interview room door opened, and another detective entered. Older, with gray hair and tired eyes. Santos looked up. Detective Patterson, this is the Morrison couple. Jake and Sarah Morrison, this is my partner, Detective Patterson. He's been reviewing the physical evidence from your property. Patterson sat down heavily, dropping a thick file on the table. We found some interesting things in your garage, Mr. Morrison. Jake's mouth went dry. What kind of things? An open container of calcium hypochlorite, chlorine shock treatment. The container was damaged, leaking powder onto your garage floor. That's impossible. I always seal those containers tightly. Maybe you forgot this time. Maybe you were in a hurry. Patterson opened the file and pulled out more photographs. We also found traces of muriatic acid near your pool equipment, fresh spills, like someone had been working with the chemicals recently. Jake stared at the photos. His garage looked like a crime scene with yellow evidence markers scattered. Around his chemical storage area, the concrete floor was stained with white powder and what looked like acid burns. I didn't spill anything, he said weakly. Here's what I think happened, Santos said, leaning forward. You were doing some aggressive pool maintenance, maybe mixing chemicals to shock the pool, trying to get it perfect for summer. Mrs. Whitmore smelled the fumes and came over to investigate. She got too close to the contaminated area and was overcome by chlorine gas. But why would she come over at midnight? Sarah demanded. Why not during the day? Why not knock on our door? Patterson shrugged. Maybe she was scared. Maybe she thought you were doing something dangerous and wanted to document it before confronting you. Document it. Jake felt a chill. What do you mean, document it? Santos pulled out an evidence bag containing a small digital camera. We found this in Mrs. Whitmore's purse. It has photos of your garage, your pool area, and your chemical storage. Dates going back 3 weeks. Jake stared at the camera. She's been photographing our property for 3 weeks. Looks like it. And according to the timestamps, she's been coming over multiple times. Always at night. Always when you weren't home. Sarah grabbed Jake's arm. That's stalking. That's harassment. Or it's concerned citizen documentation of potentially dangerous activity, Patterson said. Depends on your perspective. Santos spread out printouts of the photos. Jake's hands trembled as he looked at them. His garage from multiple angles, close-ups of chemical containers, shots of his pool equipment. The images were clear, detailed, and completely damning. She's been planning this, he whispered. Planning what, Mr. Morrison? This? All of this. She's been setting us up. Santos and Patterson exchanged glances. Setting you up for what? Jake's mind raced. The damaged chemical container. The acid spills. The convenient timing of Margaret's medical emergency right after he'd been in the garage. I think she sabotaged my chemical storage, he said. I think she's been coming over here, tampering with my equipment, waiting for the right moment. To what? Poison herself. Patterson's voice was skeptical. That's a pretty elaborate scheme, don't you think? You don't know Margaret Whitmore. Santos closed the file. Actually, we do. We've known Mrs. Whitmore for years. She's reported dozens of legitimate safety violations in this neighborhood. She's helped shut down 2 illegal businesses and got a neighbor cited for improper septic disposal. She's what we call a reliable community watchdog. Jake felt the walls closing in. She's what I call a psychopath. Mr. Morrison, I need to ask you directly. Did you, at any time, deliberately create a hazardous chemical situation on your property? No. Did you improperly store, mix, or handle pool chemicals in a way that could endanger others? No. Did you know Mrs. Whitmore was conducting surveillance of your property? Jake hesitated. He'd suspected she was watching them, but he'd never caught her in the act before last night. I suspected she might be, and you didn't report it. Report what? That my neighbor might be looking at my house. You would have laughed me out of here. Santos turned off the recorder. We're not charging you with anything right now, Mr. Morrison, but I need you to understand the seriousness of this situation. An elderly woman is fighting for her life because of chemical exposure that occurred on your property. The district attorney is reviewing the case. Jake and Sarah sat in stunned silence. Can we see her? Sarah asked quietly. Margaret, I mean, at the hospital. She's in intensive care, Patterson said. No visitors except family. Does she have family? A daughter in Seattle? She's flying in tonight. As they left the police station, Jake felt like he was walking through a nightmare. The parking lot was full of familiar Cars neighbors, he realized. Word had spread. Through Millbrook Estates like wildfire, Jake Surratt, their neighbor Tom Chen, hurried over, his face grim. Is it true? Did Margaret really get poisoned in your backyard? Before Jake could answer, more neighbors approached. The Hendersons from across the street, the Patels from next door, even the Johnsons from the end of the block, who never talked. To anyone, we heard sirens all night, Mrs. Henderson said. Is Margaret okay? She's in the hospital, Sarah said carefully. We don't know much more than that, but she was in your yard, Tom pressed. Why was she in your yard? Jake felt all eyes on him. These people had been his neighbors for 2 years. They'd attended the same HOA meetings, shared the same concerns about property values and community safety. Now they were looking at him like he was dangerous. She was trespassing, he said. Testing our pool water without permission. Why would she do that? Mrs. Patel asked. Becca? Jake Morrison stared at his phone screen, replaying the video for the 5th time. Margaret Whitmore's smile was haunting, not the expression of someone caught in the act, but of someone who wanted to be caught. We have to take this to the police, Sarah said, pacing their living room. This proves she sabotaged our chemicals. This proves we're innocent. Does it? Jake paused the video on Margaret's face. Look at her. She knows the camera is there. She's performing for it. Sarah stopped pacing. What are you saying? I'm saying this feels like another trap. Jake's phone rang. Detective Santos? Mr. Morrison, we need you to come back to the station. There's been a development in Mrs. Whitmore's case. What kind of development? Her condition has deteriorated. She's had a stroke. The doctors aren't sure she's going to make it. Jake felt the room spin. If Margaret died, this went from chemical poisoning to manslaughter. Maybe murder. We'll be right there. Actually, just you, Mr. Morrison. We need to speak with you alone. The line went dead. Sarah grabbed his arm. They're trying to separate. U.S., she said. This is bad, Jake. This is really bad. I have to go. But first, I'm forwarding this video to our lawyer. What lawyer? We don't have a lawyer. Jake was already dialing. We do now. An hour later, Jake sat in attorney David Chen's office, Tom Chen's brother, who'd driven down from the city the moment Jake called. David was reviewing the video on his laptop, his expression grim. This is either the best evidence of your innocence I've ever seen, or the most elaborate setup, David said. The question is, who sent it to you? The email came from a burner account, no identifying information. And you have no idea who might have been surveilling Mrs. Whitmore. None, David. Closed the laptop. Here's what we're going to do. We're not showing this to the police yet. Not until we understand what we're dealing with. But it proves I'm innocent. It proves Mrs. Whitmore sabotaged your chemicals. It doesn't prove you didn't know about it. It doesn't prove you weren't working together. Jake stared at him. Think I conspired with a woman who's been making my life hell for 2 years? I think the prosecutor might argue that, especially if Mrs. Whitmore dies and can't testify to the contrary. At the police station, Detective Santos looked tired. She'd been up all night, and it showed. Mr. Morrison, I'm going to be direct with you. Mrs. Whitmore's daughter arrived from Seattle this morning. She hired a private attorney. They're claiming this was an attempted murder. Jake's knees nearly buckled. Attempted murder. According to the daughter, Mrs. Whitmore has been receiving threatening messages. Anonymous notes left on her car, in her mailbox, all related to her complaints against you. I never sent any threatening messages. Can you prove that? Can you prove I did? This was found in Mrs. Whitmore's mailbox 3 days ago. Jake read the note through the clear plastic. Stop filing complaints or you'll regret it. Final warning, the handwriting was blocky, masculine. It could have been anyone's. I didn't write this. The paper is from a standard printer, 20-pound copy paper, the kind sold at every office supply store. The ink is from a basic ballpoint pen, nothing traceable. So you have no evidence connecting me to this note. We have motive, Mr. Morrison. 2 years of escalating conflict with the victim. We have opportunity. You live 3 houses away. And now we have a woman fighting for her life after being exposed to chemicals stored on your property. Jake felt the walls closing in again. What about the other notes? The ones she supposedly received? Her daughter has them. We're processing them for evidence. I want to see them. That's not how this works. The interview room door opened, and Detective Patterson entered with a grim expression. Santos, we need to talk. He glanced at Jake. Privately, they stepped outside, leaving Jake alone with his racing thoughts. Through the small window in the door, he could see them having an intense conversation. Patterson was holding a file, gesturing animatedly. When they returned, Santos looked shaken. Mr. Morrison, we've discovered something troubling. Mrs. Whitmore's home security system recorded someone entering her property 2 nights before the incident. The figure matches your height and build. Jake's blood ran cold. That's impossible. I was home with my wife. Can she verify that? Of course she can. Spouses can't testify against each other, Mr. Morrison, and they're not considered reliable witnesses in cases like this. Patterson slid a photograph across the table. It was a grainy security image showing a tall figure in dark clothing approaching Margaret's front door. The timestamp read 11:43 p.m. 2 nights ago. This isn't me, Jake said, but his voice sounded weak even to himself. The person in this image left another threatening note, Santos said. This one was more specific. Your chemical complaints end now, or you'll discover what real chemical exposure feels like. Jake stared at the photo. The figure was tall, wearing a baseball cap and dark jacket. It could have been anyone. It could have been him. I was home, he repeated. I was watching TV with Sarah. What were you watching? Jake tried to remember. 2 nights ago felt like a lifetime. I don't know, some Netflix show, maybe a movie. You don't remember what you were watching 2 nights ago. Do you remember what you were watching 2 nights ago? Santos and Patterson exchanged glances. Mr. Morrison, I'm going to read you your rights. The words hit Jake like physical blows. As Santos recited the Miranda warning, Jake's world collapsed around him. He was being arrested for attempted murder. Margaret Whitmore was dying, and somehow, impossibly, he was the prime suspect. After the booking process, Jake was allowed one. Phone call. He called David Chen. Don't say anything else to anyone. Jake was placed in a holding cell with 3 other men: a drunk driver, a shoplifter, and someone who'd been arrested for domestic violence. The domestic violence guy kept staring at him. What you in for? The man asked. Attempted murder, Jake said quietly. The man's eyebrows shot up. No shit. Who'd you try to kill? I didn't try to kill anyone. My neighbor poisoned herself and blamed me. The man laughed. That's a new one. What did she poison herself with? Pool chemicals? Pool chemicals. The man's laughter stopped abruptly. You mean like chlorine gas? Jake nodded. Shit, man. That's serious. My cousin works at the water treatment plant. Says chlorine gas will kill you fast if you don't know what you're doing. She knew what she was doing. You sure about that? Because if she screwed up the mixture, she might have accidentally made it worse than she planned. Jake felt a chill. He'd been assuming Margaret had carefully orchestrated her accident to frame him. But what if she'd miscalculated? What if her plan had gone wrong? 2 hours later, David Chen arrived with news that made Jake's stomach drop. Margaret Whitmore died 20 minutes ago, he said quietly. This is now a murder case. Jake slumped against the concrete wall. Murder. The word echoed in his head like a death sentence. There's more, David continued. Her daughter is claiming Mrs. Whitmore called her the night she died. Said she was scared. Said she thought you were planning to hurt her. That's impossible. When did she supposedly make this call? 11:30 p.m., 15 minutes before she was found in your backyard. Jake's mind raced. If Margaret had called her daughter, claiming to be scared, why had she then snuck into his yard? Unless she was establishing an alibi, Jake whispered. She called her daughter to create a record of being afraid, then went to my yard to execute her plan. Or she called her daughter because she was genuinely terrified, and then felt compelled to investigate what she thought was a dangerous situation. Whose side are you on? I'm on the side of facts, Jake, and the facts are looking bad for you. David pulled out his phone and showed Jake a news article from the local paper. Millbrook Estates resident dies in chemical poisoning. Arrested for murder, Jake's mugshot stared back at him from the screen. The article painted him as a violent neighbor who'd escalated a property dispute into murder. It mentioned the threatening notes, the security footage, the history of complaints. "They're destroying my reputation," Jake said. "It gets worse. Sarah called me. She's been getting calls from reporters, from neighbors, from Margaret's family. Someone leaked your arrest information to the media. Can they do that? Someone did. The question is who and why." David's phone buzzed with a text. He read it, and his face went pale. "What is it?" "The same person who sent you the surveillance video just sent me something else." David held up his phone. "It's a text message. The real truth about Margaret Whitmore is in her basement. Check the northeast corner. You have 24 hours before the police search it." Jake stared at the message. "Who is this person? I don't know. But they seem to know a lot about this case." David stood up. "I'm going to Margaret's house. You can't just break into a dead woman's house." "I'm not breaking in. I'm conducting a legal investigation on behalf of my client." David paused at the cell door. "Jake, I need to ask you something, and I need a completely honest answer." "Okay. Is there any chance at all that you're blocking out memories of threatening Mrs. Whitmore? Sometimes people under extreme stress do things they don't remember." Jake met his lawyer's eyes. "I remember everything, David. Every complaint. She filed every nasty look. Every time she made our lives miserable." David Chen stood in Margaret Whitmore's basement at 2 a.m., his phone's flashlight cutting through the darkness. The house was officially a crime scene. But Margaret's daughter had given him permission to retrieve personal documents for the estate. What he found in the northeast corner made his blood run cold. Behind a false panel in the basement wall was a room that looked like a surveillance command center. Multiple monitors, recording equipment, and filing cabinets filled with folders, labeled with neighbors' names. Jake Morrison's folder was the thickest, but David counted at least 12 others. "Jesus Christ," he whispered, pulling out Jake's file. Inside were hundreds of photographs, detailed surveillance logs, financial records, and what appeared to be psychological profiles. Margaret had documented Jake's daily routines, Sarah's work schedule, their friends' visiting patterns, even their grocery shopping habits. But the most disturbing discovery was a handwritten journal entry dated 3 weeks ago. "The Morrison situation is becoming complicated. My handler insists we accelerate the timeline, but I'm concerned about the chemical exposure levels. The mixture ratios he provided seem excessive. When I questioned him, he reminded me of our arrangement regarding Seattle. I have no choice but to comply." David photographed every page, his hands shaking. Margaret hadn't been acting alone. Someone had been controlling her, manipulating her into the surveillance and sabotage. Someone who knew about something that happened in Seattle. He found more journal entries detailing Margaret's growing fear of her mysterious handler. He knows about Rebecca. He knows what really happened that night in 1987. He says if I don't follow through with the Morrison plan, he'll make sure the truth comes out. Rebecca's children still think their mother died in an accident. I can't let them know I was the one driving. David's phone buzzed. A text from the anonymous source. "Did you find the truth? Check the security footage from her computer. Password is Rebecca1987. Margaret's computer was still running, surveillance feeds from around the neighborhood displaying on multiple screens. David typed in the password and accessed the archived footage. What he found made him understand the full scope of the conspiracy. The security system hadn't just been monitoring the neighborhood, it had been live streaming to an external server. Someone had been watching everything in real time, including Margaret's final night. David scrolled through the footage from 3 nights ago and found something that made his stomach drop. The figure in dark clothing approaching Margaret's house wasn't Jake Morrison. It was Margaret herself, dressed in men's clothing, placing threatening notes in her own mailbox while wearing a disguise. She'd been creating false evidence against Jake on someone else's orders. But the most damning footage was from the night she died. At 11:25 p.m., 5 minutes before she supposedly called her daughter in fear, Margaret was sitting in her basement calmly reviewing chemical mixture ratios on her computer. She wasn't scared. She was following instructions. At 11:30 p.m., her phone rang. David could see her face change as she answered, watched her expression shift from calm to terrified. The call lasted 3 minutes. When it ended, Margaret sat motionless for several minutes, then walked upstairs with the phone in her hand. The next footage showed her making the call to her daughter, but David could see she was reading from a script. Her daughter's testimony about Margaret being scared was accurate, but Margaret had been acting on orders, creating a false narrative for someone else's benefit. David's phone rang. Unknown number. "Mr. Chen, I assume you found the surveillance room." The voice was electronically distorted, but David could tell it was male. "Who is this?" "Someone who wants the truth to come out." Margaret Whitmore was being blackmailed into framing your client. But her handler made a mistake. He ordered her to increase the chemical concentrations to ensure she would appear genuinely poisoned. She miscalculated and died. What does this have to do with Seattle? In 1987, Margaret Whitmore was driving drunk when she hit and killed Rebecca Patterson. She fled the scene and let an innocent man go to prison for vehicular manslaughter. That man was released 3 years ago and has been planning his revenge ever since. David felt the pieces clicking together. Patterson. Detective Patterson. Marcus Patterson, Rebecca's brother. He became a cop to investigate his sister's death. When he discovered the truth about Margaret, he decided to destroy her life the same way she destroyed his family's. So he manipulated her into framing Jake. He needed a scapegoat, someone with a clear motive and opportunity. Jake Morrison was perfect 2 years of documented conflicts, chemical access, and no solid alibi for the threatening incidents. David was taking notes frantically. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because Marcus is about to destroy the evidence and disappear. He's planning to retire early and move to Mexico. The case against your client will stick, and the real killer will never face justice." "What evidence?" Margaret kept copies of everything, the threatening messages Marcus forced her to plant, recordings of their phone conversations, even the chemical mixture instructions. It's all in a safety deposit box at First National Bank. Box 247. The key is taped under her kitchen sink. The line went dead. David stood in the basement, surrounded by the evidence of Margaret's elaborate deception, knowing he had maybe hours before Patterson realized the surveillance room had been discovered. He photographed everything he could, then went upstairs to find the safety deposit box key. It was exactly where the anonymous caller had said it would be taped inside the cabinet under the kitchen sink. As David left Margaret's house, he noticed a familiar car parked across the street. Detective Patterson's unmarked sedan. The engine was running, but the car was empty. Patterson was somewhere nearby, possibly watching, possibly destroying evidence. David drove straight to the bank, knowing he'd have to wait until morning to access the safety deposit box. But as he pulled into the parking lot, he saw Patterson's car again. This time, Patterson was inside, talking on his phone. David parked where he could observe without being seen and called his private investigator contact. "I need a favor, and I need it now," he said, when the PI answered. "I need you to run a complete background check on Detective Marcus Patterson, Millbrook, County Sheriff's Office. I need to know everything about his sister Rebecca's death in 1987. While he waited, David reviewed the photos he'd taken from Margaret's basement. The journal entries painted a picture of a woman trapped by her past, forced to participate in an elaborate revenge plot. But they also revealed something else. Margaret had been trying to document everything, possibly planning to expose Patterson once the frame-up was complete. Her final journal entry, dated the day she died, was telling. "I know he's planning to kill me. The chemical mixture he provided tonight is far too concentrated. I won't survive the exposure, but I've hidden evidence that will prove Jake Morrison's innocence and reveal Marcus for what he is. If something happens to me, I pray someone will find the truth before an innocent man pays for my sins." David's phone rang, his PI contact. "Patterson's story checks out to a point," the investigator said. "His sister Rebecca was killed in a hit-and-run in Seattle, 1987. A man named James Murphy was convicted and served 15 years. But here's the interesting part. Murphy was exonerated in 2019 based on new evidence. The real driver was never identified. What about Patterson's career? Clean record, good cop by all accounts. But he transferred to Millbrook County 6. Months after Murphy's exoneration, right around the time Margaret Whitmore moved there from Seattle. He followed her. Looks like it. And there's something else. Patterson's been liquidating his assets over the past month. Sold his house, cashed out his pension, transferred money to offshore accounts. Classic preparation for disappearing." David hung up and called the FBI. This was bigger than a local murder case. It was a conspiracy involving a law enforcement officer, blackmail, and murder. But as he waited for the federal agents to arrive, he realized Patterson probably had contingency plans. By morning, David was standing in Judge Harrison's chambers with an emergency motion to dismiss all charges against Jake Morrison. Reviewed the evidence, the surveillance footage, Margaret's journals, the documentation of Patterson's involvement. "This is extraordinary," Judge Harrison said. "Are you alleging that a detective in the investigating department is the actual killer?" "I'm alleging that Detective Marcus Patterson blackmailed Margaret Whitmore into framing my client, then provided her with chemicals that he knew would kill her. When she died, he continued the frame-up to cover his tracks." "Where is Detective Patterson?" "Now unknown. He hasn't reported for duty in 12 hours. Judge Harrison picked up his phone. "Get me Sheriff Martinez immediately." Within an hour, David was back at the jail with an order for Jake's immediate release. But as they processed the paperwork, Sheriff Martinez arrived with bad news. "Patterson's gone," he said, cleaned out his desk, turned in his badge and gun to the duty sergeant, and disappeared. "We found his service vehicle abandoned at the airport." Jake was released into a media storm. News crews had gathered after word leaked about Patterson's disappearance and the evidence of Margaret's blackmail. David held an impromptu press conference on the courthouse steps.